Hey Jack, so we're going to go ahead and open your file here, and I'm just going to kind of go through with you all of the tabs and everything that you need to look at when you open one of these files, and just kind of how to navigate through things, what's important, what you should be changing, what you shouldn't be changing. So you said that the only thing you've got done to the vehicle is a LS3 MAF sensor, and then I think you said maybe some headers, and then maybe an intake. So we'll start over here in this general section. So if we go over here, this will tell us our operating system. So it's a P59 computer. So I'm not real sure. What you can do and what we're going to do is we're going to open a compare file from a similar vehicle, and I'll kind of show you, what potentially has been changed and maybe shouldn't be changed. But over here, started in the general tab under engine, none of this needs to be changed in your application. The only thing you would change here is the cylinder volume if you had gone to a bigger displacement engine. But the rest of this doesn't need to be changed at all, whether it's a mild or a pretty serious combination with a big cam or forced induction. None of this needs to be changed. So we'll go over here to idle. None of this needs to be changed for your application either. The base set point, if you had a different camshaft or something, this is where we would command a different idle speed, but we don't need to do that. This adaptive idle stuff, do not touch this. Even in the most radical cam or supercharger combinations, all of this modeling from GM works great. You don't need to touch this. It's all going to be just fine. Under airflow, in the event that you did a different camshaft or forced induction, we would change this base running airflow, but in a stock vehicle, you just leave it alone. Same thing with all of the adaptive idle airflow stuff, the startup. We would change stuff over here if there was a different camshaft. The throttle follower and the cracker would be one as well. But for your application, unless you have a hanging idle or anything like that, and we can log this in the scanner, but there's really no need to change any of this unless, even pretty big camshafts, you can leave a lot of this relatively stock. So if we go to the airflow tab, the map sensor, I assume you have a 1-bar map sensor. This is where you would change the map sensor data. For a naturally aspirated vehicle, a stock 1-bar map sensor is fine. So here's your MAF table. This looks like it's been altered a little bit. You can see some little steps. Let's see, if we just compare this to like a P59, so we'll go with like a 2004 Yukon. It looks like some fuel has been added to your file, potentially, maybe in some spots. No, it looks like it's been taken away, actually. So the mass airflow curve, this curve is the one that I'm going to recommend that we dial in first, and I'm going to show you how to put it in only that. I did take a peek earlier. I can tell you that this is not what a VE table should look like. You're not gonna have this much cylinder fill down in these areas. This is what one would look like. So you can see most of your cylinder fill is happening in this area right here. If we went with a bigger camshaft, it would maybe be pushed out to here, and we would need less fuel down here. So this is what it kind of should look like. And this is a stock unmodified one, and then this is what yours kind of looks like. I would assume that this right here would, and I believe I did peek at your data log. This is where also you're having some weird things happen. So I am going to go ahead and change this. What I'm going to do is go over here to the compare feature. Over here on the far right here, this shows the differences in the two files. And so if you hit 0, it changes everything from this file, your compare file, to the file that is being opened. So we're going to put this VE table back to stock, but what we are also going to do, cranking VE should not be modified, but the changes aren't that big, so that might just be a year change. We are going to put this thing in mass airflow sensor only mode. So we're going to go over here to dynamic and go over here to high RPM disable and set this to 400. And that's going to put the vehicle in mass airflow sensor mode only. So one of the things to point out is that you had this set to 4,000, okay? But then it looks like over here under engine, the mass airflow sensor had been failed, which is what you do. And then what you would also do is set these to mill on first error to fail the mass airflow sensor. But the only issue was that over here at 4,000, this means that above 4,000 RPM, there's nothing that's going to be referencing there's nothing for the computer to reference. So this would have been set to about 8,000. And so what I'm going to recommend that we do, though, is we put this thing in speed density only. So, I mean, in mass airflow sensor only. So we're going to put this back to mill on second error. And then we're going to go back to airflow, and we're going to set this to 13.5, which is the number for these trucks. So dialing in the mass airflow sensor is going to be the easiest thing. It's going to be the quickest. A lot of folks will tell you that they need to run in their blended mode, and we can do that. But dialing in that mass airflow sensor curve is going to be the best and easiest thing. Electronic throttle, none of this needs to be touched. Okay. Exhaust, you can leave that like it is. Fuel under general, it looks like, so under Stoich, so 14.7 is a pure air fuel, gas scale with 0% ethanol, which we don't have in the United States. So 14.108 is the number. And it looks like, too, this is not a flex fuel scale, so I would assume that you're not running flex fuel, which if you were, you need to tell me so I can show you how to set that up, okay? And again, for we're still trying to figure out which injectors the vehicle, the injectors came out of, but everything looks to be pretty close. So these should be, I believe these are 22 pound an hour, which this is correct. For right now, we're going to leave it because you were getting some weird VE table things, and it's because the VE table was kind of jacked up. So none of this needs to be changed, though, right now. We're just going to leave it like it is. If we go to oxygen sensors, it looks like 284 is the number. I would set the min to 1, or the max to 1, and then set your baro to a KPA it's not going to reach, which would be 255. And then none of this other stuff needs to be touched. Okay, everything else needs to just be left alone. If you do want to do any open loop stuff, I'll show you where in the scanner you can do that. Open loop base, none of this needs to be changed. You do want to turn off the short-term fuel trims in open loop. You don't want them referencing anything, okay? Power enrichment, this is a big one, okay? This is where, this is how the vehicle gets into wide open throttle fueling, okay? So when you're cruising around, you want to see that 14.1 or that lambda of 1. Lambda is going to be, once you change the Stoich ratio, you want to read in lambda, and I'll explain that here in a second. But power enrichment, we're going to start with our, we want the minimum map to be 65. That's a good number. These are all triggers that you have to get to get here, which we're going to get to in a second. Minimum torque, I like to set this about 30%. If it's set to 100, that means you have to hit 100% torque as the first trigger, which is hard to do. The cold table is the one that's referenced. So 90 means that you have to be at least 90% throttle at all times to hit power enrichment. Great for gas mileage, not so much good for performance. So down here, we're going to set this to something like 60. And then we're going to say 4,000 and above, we're going to say something like 20. So, as you're standing in the throttle, it takes less and less throttle to get into power enrichment, which is good. And the vehicle should drive better as well. We're going to copy that to our hot table just to be uniformed, okay? And then the RPM delay, 5,000 is too much. We're going to set this to like 1,000, okay? Our enrichment rate, we're just going to set to 1, okay? And then you can see here, this is what the fueling looks like. It's going from a leaner, Stoich ratio to a richer one. You don't really want to do that. You just want to set it to one ratio. We're going to target initially, we're going to target like a 1.17, which is going to be like 88 lambda, 0.88 lambda, which is going to be the same as probably 12.2 or 12.3 AFR on a gas scale. This is going to keep it from being a moving target. That way, when you transition at 3,200 RPM from closed loop into the open loop fueling, it's not having to hit all these different power enrichment ratios like it was before. You don't need to mess with these ECT or IAT adders. This table is a big one. This is where you can really pick up a lot of performance. Temperature control looks like it's already been disabled. That's fine. Fuel cutoff, leave decel fuel cutoff on like it is. Don't change that. You need that. There's just no reason not to leave it on. Lean fuel saving, no need to touch anything there. Transient, you don't need to mess with anything there. Flex fuel, it looks like flex fuel is disabled, so I would assume that you're not running flex fuel. So that is perfectly fine. Okay, going into spark, you want to make sure spark smoothing is disabled, which this one is. Your high octane table, yeah, I mean this looks pretty smooth. It's probably a little under timed, but there again, once you get your fueling dialed in, you'll be okay. What you want to do is copy this table, and you want to paste it to your low octane table, and then you want to subtract about 8 degrees. That's going to give the computer the ability to learn down in the event of bad gas or something like that. Let's see, you don't need anything in your flex fuel table because you're not running flex fuel. You don't want, these are all corrections, okay? You want everything, all of your spark timing to come from this high octane table. Unless you are forcing the vehicle into speed density, which it will run on the low octane table, so these have to be the same, which I do recommend against. The only other way to get around that is to do an operating system swap to like a 2-bar or an enhanced setup. And that way in speed density, you do have the high and low octane table, but you do not need a 2 or 3 bar setup if you're naturally aspirated, because you will lose resolution breakpoints in this VE table. Instead of seeing 15 to 105 kPa, you'll see 15 to 210. And so this whole portion of the VE table down here will be useless because you don't have boost. So that is that. So this base table, you don't need any adders here. I always zero this out on everything. Intake air temperature, depending on where you live, you don't want anything modifying the spark. When you get into this range, I think that you're from up north, so if your intake air temps are getting this hot, you definitely want it to start pulling timing. This was really useful with forced induction, with turbochargers and sitting in traffic and stuff like that. Same thing with engine coolant temperature. You just need to zero, over here you'll see at 212 degrees, it's pulling timing. Well, most vehicles run in the 220 range, so you don't need anything modifying that. So you can zero it out up to there, and then you can highlight and just kind of blend, and that's a good starting point. EGR looks like it's already zeroed out. Catalyst heating, if you've deleted the cats and turned COT off, you can do this deal. All this stuff you don't need to touch. You don't need to touch the idle spark advance. Don't get caught trying to mess with the over and under speed. You just don't need to mess with it. Spark limit, usually you'll see negative 20s in here. This looks fine. You want the transmission to be able to pull timing on the shifts when it needs to. Retard, only thing we're going to change here is the recovery rate. 0.1 is a good number. That's, that will kind of desensitize the knock sensors enough to where they'll still do their job, but they won't just start pulling timing just because. Burst knock, however, you can delete this. You don't need burst knock. Burst knock is a preemptive measure. You don't need that. Dwell, don't touch this. Knock sensors, don't touch this either. Okay. Torque model, general, and loss. In big camshaft combinations, you might have to mess with this, but probably not. Torque management, there's some limits in here that you might want to, 640, that's fine. Probably not going to hit these, but just to be uniform there again, if you hover over these things, it'll tell you in the bottom right what the limit is. So this is pretty common. I do this with all Gen 3, 4, and 5s. Okay, it just means don't blow yourself up. Minimum torque, you can set this to 640. That's gonna be fine. Tip-in torque, it's already done. If you see trans input max 41, what is it? 41 million thousand foot-pounds, whatever you want to call it. That's perfectly fine. What you can do is just enter this in and Control C, Control V, Control V. That way none of this stuff will get in your way. Brake torque management, you can disable this. If you have a drive-by-wire setup, you can take this and set it to 100. Can't remember if you do or not, but you can set everything from 10% throttle and below to 100. You might see the throttle response is a little more responsive, maybe. Set these to 255. You can read what these do. Down here it says ECT torque management cylinder disable versus mode. During ETC traction control strategies, the PCM may disable injectors in order to control engine torque. This table is an 8-bit binary, so a value of 0 means that the cylinder will be disabled. A value of 255 means all cylinders will remain enabled, which is kind of what you want. This one obviously is not used because it's already zeroed out. I would leave these alone. The transmission uses these two tables to reference the amount of spark that's being pulled in relationship to torque management. These guys right here, though, you can zero these out. These are going to be fine to get rid of. That one's already not used, and you can set these to disable if you'd like. Engine, no need to touch any of this. It's going to be fine. Abuse, you can set it to 8,000 just because. That'll take care of kind of the engine side. If we go to engine diag, we did re-enable the mass airflow sensor. There's no need to mess with your misfires, unless you have a camshaft. Your DTCs, anything that was a sensor 2, looks like here. No error reported. You've already kind of taken care of some of those, so that's perfectly fine. Let's see, fuel system, don't touch that. System, if we go to general, looks like VATs have already been deleted. That's perfectly fine. Fans, I would probably set these a little bit lower. 190, or let's say, sorry, maybe 190 to 185, and then set this one to 195 to 190, just to get a little bit better cooling. That would be good. AC, I would set these to like 40, the disabled. This is under wide open throttle. You can it's actually going to disable the AC when you get above these thresholds. So it'll probably save you 20 horsepower, which is good. And then speedo, limiter, you've already updated these, it looks like. So this is where I would start. So what I'm going to do is just save this as, let's see, we'll just call this Jack P Math 1. So, save this like this, and then if we go to your table here, so like if we look, you can see where this, it was definitely kind of weird. So we definitely need to run it on a stock VE table first, just to kind of see where we're at. So it looks like your oxygen sensors are tracking together, which they should. So that's good. And then, yeah. Let's see. I'm just kind of looking at some of this stuff. Let's see. You got your, so like your, so you can see here what we can do if you want to see what your wideband is doing. We can type in equivalence ratio commanded, and then we're going to come here and we're going to add another one, and then we will add your MPVI. Where's it at? Your Innovate transforms, oxygen sensors, equivalency ratio. Where's it at? L1C2. Yeah, so if we see here, you can see your EQ commanded versus your EQ, what's actually happening. The only thing is that you can see here that you're in closed loop. So here we go. So this is an EQ error graph. So this is what your VE table would look like. So right here we're using the EQ ratio error math. And then we have, and I can go into this in another video for you, but basically this is your error. The only problem though is that if you look right here, you're never going into open loop, and that's probably because of your power enrichment settings. So you were never actually able to hit those marks. And so we could even go one step further here, and we can actually also log the EQ error. And let's make this a different color. Let's make this like red. Yeah, so you can see and it shows you the error and where you're at. So, yeah, so there's definitely a bunch that's been done to your file. So what I would recommend is running it I would recommend running it on the mass airflow sensor and seeing, we're going to be looking at this table right here. So you can see here, sometimes the mass sensor will still report some data, but we've actually failed the speed density table now. So what I would recommend is going out and driving it, and we will be able to see actually what the math table, the math curve is doing with the speed density table basically being turned off. So yeah, so I'm going to send you this stuff and load this file in, and then yeah, we'll just kind of go from there.